Okay, so now we're up to the 5th chapter of the book of Esther. It's the scroll of Esther. And she's starting her procedure, which will lead to a plea on behalf of the Jewish people. As I said, it was yesterday. Yeah. She said to fast for her for 3 days. And now this chapter starts, came to pass on the 3rd day. And there are 2 ways to read that. Either it's the 3rd day of her fast. The previous verses talk about fasting for 3 days. It would be natural to associate the 3rd day as being the 3rd day of the fast. But if that is true, you have a problem. Because her strategy takes 2 days. There's the first banquet, and at the first banquet, she invites Achashverosh to the second banquet the next day, and only the second banquet the next day does she plead on behalf of the Jewish people. So if the first banquet is on the 3rd day of the fast, it means that the second banquet, where she makes that crucial plea for the Jewish people, is after the fast is already over. That's not obvious what the logic would be in that. Wouldn't you want this crucial plea for survival to be at a time when people are at the height of the fast the time of praying and beseeching God and doing tshuva, because that's part of what a fast is? Why would you have it for the day after? And I explained yesterday that this way of reading it understands that the real test, the real turning point of the scenario is when she will stand in the doorway and Achashverosh will see her and either let her die or accept her. If Achashverosh accepts her, the dynamic is over. All the rest is just consequences. It's just follow-up. It's anticlimax. And the reason for it, in part, is because if he lets her die, it's definitely over. But aside from that, the whole setting is she is appealing to what we call midas hadin, which is the attribute of strict judgment, strict justice, strict accountability, which is the source of the danger. The projected annihilation of the Jewish people comes from that source because something has gone wrong, and this is a response to it. And if, from the point of view of the strictest possible justice, she's accepted and given the right to live against the law, which would have her die, then she knows already that it's over, that the midas hadin has accepted her, and the rest of it is just follow-up. So that's why you would want to have the first banquet on the 3rd day of the fast. The other one says that it's the 3rd day from when she was talking, and when she's talking is the day before the fasting begins. So the 3rd day from that is the 2nd day of the fast. That fits more naturally into your intuitions. The 2nd day of the fast is the first banquet. She says, please come tomorrow to the second banquet, which is the 3rd day of the fast, at the height of the fast, and then she asks for the survival of the Jewish people. So either one can be understood, and there is a difference of opinion among the commentators.
You were saying either way, the second banquet happens after the fast.
No. The second banquet happens on the 3rd day of the fast. Not clear what I'm saying.
I thought the first banquet would happen on the 3rd day of the fast.
The first banquet can't happen after the second banquet.
1, 2, 3. Yes.
Yeah. Right? I mean, yeah. I counted it on my fingers, so be sure.
I thought if we're counting from when Esther says fast for 3 days. So
Okay, so let's stop for a second. Okay.
Yeah.
So then 3 days means today, tomorrow, and the next day.
Yes.
Okay. So then today, tomorrow, and the next day will be the 2nd day of the fast. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the 2nd day of the fast will be the first banquet. First time she goes to the king.
Yes.
And then the second banquet is the next day, which is the 3rd day of the fast. And that second banquet is where she pleads on behalf of the Jewish people. And that's now happening at the height of the fast. And that's natural. That you understand intuitively would be the best condition under which to plead for the survival of the Jewish people.
I thought that the 3rd day was when she went to the king the first time, and then saying that the first banquet would be the next day.
No.
Okay.
No, she says today. She says right here.
Oh.
What is it for you?
Okay.
She says, verse 4, Let the king come today to the banquet that I prepared for them. Okay, so that's where the slip came. Okay, good. So that's number one. And as we said, when the king continuously identifies her as having two projects, one personal and one perhaps political, and he responds to the two of them differently. When the personal project, here he says Malach Esther. What is it for you? And the rest of the time he says Mashe Elosech. What is your request? And the other word is bakashasech, which is much more powerful. It's something that you really want more. You chase after it. It's crucial to you. And that's something which might have social, political consequences. And there he puts on this limitation up to half the kingdom. But up to, and not conclude. He doesn't want to destabilize the kingdom as a whole. And the truth is, she has both. She has a personal request because she's Jewish. And the decree goes through, she's going to die. And also for her nation, for her people, which is a nation under the command of the king and a part of the empire, and she wants to turn that around. So he gets it right that she has a double. There's a double there. Okay. So she has the first, and at the feast, he asks again, and she says, I want you to come tomorrow to the feast that I'm going to make for you. And then I will do the king's bidding. And we said that there was this issue between them. He wants to know who she is, and she's been hiding it for years. And she tells him, tomorrow I'm going to identify myself. Well, he's happy about that. But he also thinks she's been hiding it all these years, and tomorrow she's going to identify herself. This must be really important. Something important enough for her to break this rule that she's been following of hiding her identity. And he's right. So far, that's it. Okay, now we're up to verse 9. That day, Haman went out joyful and exuberant. But when Haman noticed Mordecai at the king's gate, that he neither stood up nor stirred before him, Haman was infuriated with Mordecai. This, after all, was the motivation for the entire project. Mordecai's not bowing down. And there's a law from the emperor that everyone has to bow down to him. And the emperor has a kind of tolerance policy. If you're a conscientious objector, then I wouldn't make you do it against your conscience. I would never do that. I'm just the emperor, that's all. You see his weakness here, which I've told you about several times. And he said it was a religious thing, but the advisors tried a test by having Haman pressed right in front of him, and he wouldn't bow down, and they said, you're lying because your religion wouldn't prevent you from showing respect to someone who's noble by bowing down to him. And indeed, Moses bowed down to his father-in-law, didn't he? So don't tell us it's religious preventing him when he walked right next to you. If he's in the middle of the square and you're 100 yards from him and everybody bows down, that's not showing him respect. That's doing something else. It could be interpreted as idol worship, maybe, or who knows what. But even though they didn't believe his justification, if Mordecai says, my conscience doesn't allow me to do it, the king says, I honor your conscience and I won't require you to do it. So again, a symptom of his. But Haman is infuriated. And then as we saw, Haman said to himself, if I take revenge on Mordecai, I'm going to look picayune, I'm going to look trivial. What? The disrespect of a Jew bothered you? What's the matter with you? They're of no account whatsoever. How could you take revenge against a Jew? So he decided to make it into a political issue and try to wipe out the entire Jewish people. But here he is, coming out at the height of his joy, as he's going to explain to his friends at length, the height of his joy, and this undoes him. Yeah.
So what was was Mordecai following Judaism by not bowing to Haman when he was...
Okay, we're going to talk about this in detail. Rav Esther has a whole essay on this. There's a lot to learn from it. In the meantime, I'm just working through the text, but I will talk about it in this issue before we get to Purim. Okay, 10. Here he says again. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. He sent... Now here, as we'll see the text as it develops, you have to pay very careful attention to the exact formulation of the text. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. In that order. Hello, is that the natural order you would think of? Well, it depends on the marriage, huh? Okay. His friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the glory of his wealth and his many sons, and every instance where the king had promoted him and advanced him above the officials and royal servants. Haman said, moreover, Queen Esther invited no one but myself to accompany the king to the banquet that she had prepared. And tomorrow, too, I'm invited by her along with the king. Well, that's a lot. That's an awful lot. Right? He's got an awful lot going for him in worldly terms. The next statement in 13 is astonishing. Yet all this means nothing to me, so long as I see that Jew Mordechai sitting at the king's gate. Now let's just meditate a little bit on the psychology of this person. He has money, he has power, he has authority, he has a big family, he has the favor of the king and the queen, and all of that is zero, Z-E-R-O, zero, because a Jew is sitting in the king's gate and won't bow down to him. Isn't that a little exaggerated? Zero? Okay, there's a fly in the ointment. Okay, things aren't perfect. Yeah, I wish Mordechai also would bow down to me. But that deprives him of everything? There are people like that. Some people, sometimes they're called perfectionists. If it isn't perfect, it's nothing. The grade after 100 is zero. There's no 98. No. It's either 100 or zero. But that's a sickness. Okay, we can classify him as sick. I don't mind. No skin off my back. We classify him as sick. But it's really very extreme. So, I had a student here 20 years ago who made a very, very astute remark here. He said, Rabbi, you told us that when, I said this to you yesterday, you told us that when it says the king, without specifying his name, then it applies to both Achashverosh and the Creator. When it says King Achashverosh, it's only talking about the flesh and blood king. When it says the king, it's applying to both of them. And here he says, when I see Mordechai sitting at the gate of the king, and he made the following remark. There are people who philosophically make the stupid mistake of claiming to be materialists. And in addition to that, yes, and I'm prepared to defend that if somebody wants to fight about it. And here he has the height of the material world, but Mordechai sits at the gate of the creator of the world who gives the world its meaning, who gives the world its value, its purpose, its significance. And seeing that is a constant reminder that he's got the short end of the stick. Because having all of that material power and material wealth can't be compared with fulfilling the purpose of the entire creation. So he feels like it's nothing. And it's not crazy to feel like it's nothing. He's outclassed by it. He's categorically and qualitatively outclassed by it. And that's an insight into his character, which is much more credible. That unspeakably evil person who started the Second World War and was out to kill all of the Jews on the planet, wrote, among other things, that I have to kill the Jews because they invented the conscience. And the conscience is the great shackles of mankind. He was a great fan of Nietzsche. The shackles of mankind, we have to break those shackles to become great in the way that we want to be great. The Jews' existence reminded him continuously of the fact that there's another dimension, and he wanted them out of the way. So that's at least some picture of what might be going on in Mordechai, in Haman's mind. And there are other commentaries which deal with this issue in other ways as well. Well, when the Jews are approaching the land of Israel, the king of Moab is afraid of something, and he hires Bilam to curse them, and he says clearly, but enigmatically, I want to chase them out of the land. So chase them out of the land. He's not saying, I'm afraid they're going to conquer my kingdom and take it over. No. He doesn't want them to get to their land. They want to stay in the wilderness? Fine. Stay there with your manna every day and with your pillar of fire and pillar of cloud, and the clouds protecting you. Have a nice life. Just don't go into the land of Israel. Why not? What's that again? What's it to him if they go into the land of Israel and live in their land? So the Shem Shmuel explains that he's dedicated to a materialistic philosophy and a physical lifestyle. And when the Jews go into the land of Israel, they're going to live with nature, and they're going to sanctify nature by investing spirituality into the natural world. Oh, no, he says, I don't want that. You'll rob me of what I want. I want the physical for the physical. I am a proud bearer of the Darwinian banner that I'm just a slightly smarter squirrel. I am just an advanced animal. Rabbi Becher told me that his wife was doing a doctorate at the University of Toronto a long time ago in a study of animal behavior, and in their writings they had to refer to non-human animals and human animals. But you had to word the word animals after human. You couldn't say just people, because you had to stress the fact that we're just animals. We're just a different kind of animal. So he said, you're going to rob me of that. I'm just living the life as an animal. Okay, so that's an insight into his way. So now, this is what he explains. Now remember, who did he call to be with him now? His friends and his wife. So he explains to them his problem. 14. Then his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends said to him, and you notice instantly that she jumps to the front. She jumps to the front. Indeed, as I said before, you could wonder why he called his friends and his wife. But now she jumps to the front. Okay. Let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high. Tomorrow morning, speak to the king and have them hang Mordechai on it. Then, in good spirits, accompany the king to the banquet. This suggestion pleased Haman, and he had the gallows erected. 50 cubits high. Is some magic in the number 50? Did you choose 50 just sort of arbitrarily, or because it's a nice round number? So the oral tradition preserves the following detail. There was a banqueting room in the palace. That's where the banquets were held. And that room had windows looking out. And if you calculate where Haman's living and where that window is, if he built a gallows 50 cubits high and Mordechai's hanging on it, he can see Mordechai from the banqueting room, and that will seal his joy. That will cement his joy. That's why she said 50 cubits high. And he says to her, my darling wife, you're so clever. That's why I married you and put you last when I called. Oh, well, okay. And as you will see, as Kodesh Baruch Hu often does, he takes the wicked person's actions and uses his own actions against him. You know, there are two ways. You can reply to wickedness by just overpowering it. You could do that. It's more subtle and more ironical if you use the actions of the wicked person against him, and you'll see that that's going to be in spades. Okay? Chapter 6. Oh, so now the advice was, go to the king and hang him now. Since already there's a decree against the Jewish people as a whole, so this is just part of the general decree. Oh, this one, because he displeases you, gets it early. You don't have to think that you're just taking revenge against Mordechai alone. And that was what made him hesitate. That night, sleep eluded the king. So he ordered that the record book, the Chronicles, be brought and read before the king. Now, I didn't remark on this before, but when Mordechai saved the king's life by reporting the plot against him, It says there that it was written down in the Book of Chronicles. Divrei Hayamim in Hebrew. That's just history. But here it adds a word, Sefer Zichronos, Divrei Hayamim. Zichronos means reminders. And that means that there were notations of things to be done. It's not just recording past facts for information and to remember the history, but there are also notes about what needs to be done, and that's what he is bringing. He's recording, asking for it to be read for, because it is Sefer Zichronos. So, and you have these servants, and they open up. It's a scroll, right? They open it up, and they read to him, and he listens. There it was found recorded that Mordechai had denounced Bigthan and Seresh, the two of the king's servants of the guardians of the threshold, who plotted to lay hands on the king of Achashverosh. There was that plot against the king's life. And the Mordechai was the one who had identified them and saved the king's life. So now the king asks, what honor or dignity has been conferred on Mordechai for this? Asked the king. So years have gone by. He didn't give any honor or dignity to Mordechai at the time. Now all of a sudden he's concerned about that. Did we do something, for Mordechai? So the scenario here is a little strange. The oral tradition preserves it this way. He couldn't sleep. Why can't he sleep? He thinks, maybe I'm failing to fulfill a responsibility. Maybe I've left something undone. And sort of subconsciously I'm aware of it, but I'm not calling it to consciousness, and it's nagging me, and that's why I can't sleep. And remember, this is Achashverosh, the weak, the worried one, the one who wants to make sure that everything's okay, everything's done according to the rules. So he says, bring this book up, which has notations in it of things that I have to do. Let's see, maybe I forgot something. Now, as it happens, there's more history than when Mordechai identified. It goes back further. It happened to be open to that passage. Where Mordechai is recorded as having saved the king's life. And now the king thinks, this is why I can't sleep. It's eating me up that I didn't do something for him. Now, we explained, when we saw that the incident, why didn't he do something for him? And I explained it, my own, as in the following way. First of all, if somebody saves your life, I think you'd like to reward them because you'd like to encourage people to save your life. Wouldn't that be something you'd like people to do? You might live longer that way. On the other hand, Mordechai is a Jew. And the Jews are really at the very bottom of the society. After all, he has 127 provinces. Each province has its own local ruler, has its own local population and culture and national identity. The Jews are scattered everywhere. They have no national cohesion. They have no single leader.
Poor?
I'm sorry?
Were they poor?
That's a good question. I don't know anything about that, to tell you the truth, whether they were poor or not. But they weren't one of the nations. It's like you think of the that ethnic group of people that's in Syria and in Iraq and in Iran and the Kurds, right? So the Kurds are very unfortunate people because they have no state. So there's a minority here, and a minority there, and a minority there. They don't have the same status as a citizen of Iraq or a citizen of Iran, right? So we were something like that. And so to reward a Jew, saying shalom, saying Hebrew, maybe yes, but it didn't bother him much. But now when he can't sleep, he's looking for things that he hasn't done. He's looking for loose ends. This incident is recorded, and he thinks to himself, what did I do? And the pages answer him, nothing. Nothing has been done for him, replied the king's pages. Okay, yeah.
Do we have archaeological evidence, or just have we found any archaeology of the Book of Chronicles from that time?
Yes, there is a fellow who I knew him pretty occasionally. He was nifter a couple of years ago. His name was Landy, and he wrote a book on the book of Esther and the archaeological background for it. And I'm sure it's still in print, so you can probably find it. What was his first name? Yehuda Landy, if I'm not mistaken. Yehuda Landy. Nothing has been done for him. King said, "Who is in the courtyard?" Now I don't know why. All throughout they translate Chatzer as court. No, there are no judges sitting there. Nobody's sentenced to life imprisonment there. It's the courtyard, where you then enter the building. Why they translate it as court, I have no idea. So who's in the courtyard? Now, this book doesn't leave anything to your imagination. Doesn't leave anything to all the stage directions are there, all the implications are there. Your helpful, friendly translator put it into parentheses, which is not bad interpretation. Now, Haman had just come to the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordechai on the gallows. See this wonderful irony? Haman's coming to hang him, and the king wants to honor him. Wow, there's going to be an explosion, eh? He had prepared for him. So the king's servant said to him, "Is Haman standing in the courtyard?" And the king said, "Let him enter." When Haman came in, the king said to him, "What should be done for the man whom the king especially wants to honor?" Now put yourself in Haman's shoes. I mean, not for long, and don't be comfortable, but put yourself in Haman's place. The king says to Haman, "What should be done for the man whom the king wants to honor?" Who's getting more honor right now in the kingdom than anybody else? Triple. Haman, right? So who else could it be that the king wants to honor? It's got to be him, right? So he thinks, wow, here's my chance. What should he do for someone he wants to honor? And he goes over the top. Over the top. Haman said to himself, whom would the king especially want to honor besides me? So Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king especially wants to honor, have them bring a royal robe that the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden. And now come delightfully ambiguous words. One with a royal crown on his head. Which one? The person or the horse? The commentators commented there's a little ambiguity here, and maybe something about Haman's attitude towards the king, was coming out here. Okay. And as you'll see, he omits the crown later. Let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble officers. Let them attire the man whom the king especially wants to honor. Let them parade him on horseback to the city square, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king especially wants to honor. Now this is over the top. The rule is, with anything that is the personal used property of the king, nobody can use it after his death. It's royal. Even the next king typically doesn't use it. He gets his own. Here, while the king's alive, take his attire and take his horse, with or without the crown, and this person should wear it. That's really over the top, right? And now comes one of the great surprises. So Haman says to the king, verse 10, then the king said to Haman, hurry then, get the robe and the horse as you have said, and do all this for Mordechai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Can you imagine Haman's face when this happens? Do not omit a single detail that you've suggested, because the king already understands that this is going to be tough for Haman. It's going to be tough. And something else is coming out here. I told you we would have to explain why Esther invited Haman to the banquet. What was the point in that? The point in that was to make the king jealous of Haman. Often, kings are worried about competition from someone who achieves too much status under the rule of the king. Stalin, every 10 years, purged all of his top advisors. Because if you're a top advisor to Stalin, then you can do a lot of favors for people by getting them from Stalin, and then those people owe the advisor some kind of allegiance, and then there's competition for allegiance. So he just murdered them. It was common for kings to do that. Here, she's trying to insert into the king's subconscious, maybe Haman's a competitor. Maybe a competitor even in the queen's eyes. Who knows? So he's thinking, here's a way to take Haman down a peg or 10 pegs. You go, Mordechai the Jew. He calls him the Jew. That for Haman is in your face. Go and honor Mordechai the Jew in public. But this the king doesn't know, that Haman was coming to have Mordechai executed. So this is really upside down. Mamish upside down. So Haman took the robe and the horse. You see, it doesn't mention the crown now. So the oral tradition says when Haman said the crown, the king's face grew white. What, the crown? So he decided maybe that's going too far, and he left it out. And the horse and attired Mordechai, and led him to the city square, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king especially wants to honor. Well, Mordechai returned to the king's gate, and Haman hurried home, despondent, with his head covered. Whatever that means. Wow. Now, watch. Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that happened to him. Yeah, those were the ones who gave him the advice, right? So it's his wife Zeresh and all his friends. In that order. That he told it to them. And now the response. And his advisors and his wife Zeresh, what do you notice? Say again? First of all, you switched it. She became at the end of the list, right? Like the way he invited her in the first place. And?
Friends to advisors?
Yeah, they're not friends anymore. Haman's on the way down. It's not worthwhile to be their advisors. They're going to give him advice, but friends, that's it. The friendship was only pragmatic, and the pragmatic reason for it has disappeared. Look how beautifully the text is written. Look how carefully the text is written, right? It's typical of our texts.
So this interaction happened at night, and then you led him around during the next day?
That's right.
Okay.
Before the new banquet. And Zeresh said to him, if Mordechai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but you will undoubtedly fall before him. Now, what? There's some question as to Mordechai's lineage? Maybe he isn't Jewish? If he's a Jew, But people do this sometimes. Sometimes you say if, and you don't really mean it. When I was first learning symbolic logic, and you had to symbolize sentences on the basis of understanding what the English words meant, one of the examples that we had to symbolize was, there's coffee on the stove if you want some. The way you symbolize that is, there's coffee on the stove. Because the coffee being on the stove isn't dependent upon you wanting it. If you want it, it's there. And if you don't want it, it's not there. The if isn't an if supporting the coffee being on the stove. It's to say, there's a coffee on the stove, and I'm offering you, if you'd like. It's not a condition. So here, they're saying that from the fact that he's a Jew, you could deduce that since you've begun to fall, you're going to fall. Because, they're quoting a verse from the book of Genesis, that there's a struggle between two powers, and when one's up, the other one's down. And up until now, we've been up, you've been up, we the Persians have been up, and the Jews have been down, but now the positions are changing, and there's no stopping it. You're going to fall to the bottom. So the if here is in the sense of seeing as how that Mordechai is Jewish, there's no hope.
How did she know that? Like, how do they know the Jewish text?
Oh, how do they know that? It's an interesting question. There seemed to have been some general knowledge, even hundreds of years later. The Jews had a history, and the history was fairly well known. I mentioned this when we talked about the parties, the celebrations. Belshazzar, who made a celebration and died that night because they assassinated him, because they were calculating when the 70-year prophecy was going to be up. Remember that? The very fact that the Jews had a continuous history, a continuous culture, was very unusual. Talking here about 1,000 years after the Exodus from Egypt. 1,000 years is a long time in national and cultural history. And going back even 300 years more to Abraham. So it's they had a reputation, and since the Exodus from Egypt was spectacular and spectacularly destructive for the people who stood in their way, so that's why they were worried over here. So there was information among the intelligentsia, and I suppose that Haman was part of the intelligentsia. He wouldn't have been appointed to a high position like that unless he was very useful.
Why then, if they knew this information about the Jew and the Jewish God, were the Jews treated badly and not respected?
First of all, when you ask why, sometimes you want a reason, and sometimes you want a psychological explanation, which isn't a reason. It's just the way to do it. I'll tell you, and we're drifting a little, but it's not bad. The people ask whether there's any record of the Exodus from Egypt. Now, there was an Egyptian priest in the 2nd century BCE who wrote some kind of document. His name was Manetho, and he does actually mention the Jewish Exodus from Egypt. He actually mentions it. And he says, the Jews became lepers and we kicked them out. The Egyptians kicked them out. So when I first read that, I thought, okay, that's spin. The Jews were there and they all did leave. Okay, but you make it that you kicked them out and because they were lepers. They thought to themselves, hold on. That's almost word for word what the Torah says. The Torah says that there was a plague of the firstborn, and they knew it was because God wanted the Jews to leave, and the presence of the Jews in the country was causing their death. Okay, so it's either the God of the Jews or the lepers, and they did kick us out. Ki gorshu mitzrayim. We didn't go racing out voluntarily. We were expelled from Egypt. So Manetho's, and he's 1,200 years later. He's more than that. The record that he has is, I would say, 90% true. They did push us out, and they pushed us out because our presence there was causing their death. It just wasn't leprosy; it was God who was. So that's a record. That's a memory of the event. Okay. So while they're still talking to him, the king's servants arrived, and they hurried to bring Haman to the banquet, which Esther had arranged. Okay, now we come to one climax of the book. So, the king and Haman came to feast with Queen Esther. The king asked Esther again on the 2nd day of the wine feast, "What is your request, your she'elah, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you with no restrictions at all, no limits, because it's your personal request. Sky's the limit. And what is your petition?" And I like the translation of petition here because it gives it a political overtone. "Even if it be up to half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." But that's the limit. And Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have won your majesty's favor and pleases the king," she knows exactly her position. Her position is someone the king likes. That's it. Nothing else. "If so, let my life be granted me as my request." That's my personal request. Yes, I do have a request for me personally. "And my people as my petition." That's a political thing. You're right. It has political overtones. "For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, slain, and exterminated." That's why I'm asking you. Had we been sold as slaves and servant girls, I would have kept quiet. It's only because it's life and death. I would not have. "For the adversary is not worthy of the king's damage." Whatever, these are words in poetry. They're hard to explain. But in other words, I wouldn't have disturbed the king if it was just a question of slavery. I would have taken it on myself without any complaints. I wouldn't want to disturb the king in any way, but it's life and death. Now, she doesn't say who she is. She just says, I am of a people for whom there's a danger of complete annihilation. So the king is like, what? Thereupon the king, Achashverosh, exclaimed, said to Queen Esther, who is it? Where is the one who dared to do this? Thinking that whoever did it must know what he's doing. And if he knows what he's doing, he must have had an intention of killing the queen, and that's not good. Because the king doesn't want his queen to be in danger. What? How could you do that? And Esther says, an adversary, an enemy, this wicked Haman. Bomb! First of all, Haman doesn't know he's going to be hit. And second of all, it's the king's prime minister. Hello! He's the second in command of the whole kingdom, and he's the one who's responsible for this tragedy. It's like never dawned on Achashverosh that Esther might be Jewish. Like, what? Okay. Haman trembled in terror before the king and the queen. The king rose in a rage from the wine feast and went into the palace garden, while Haman remained to beg Queen Esther for his life. For he saw that the king's evil determination against him, well, was final. In other words, he'd made up his mind that it was going to be over for Haman. But again, she has leverage. So if he can somehow get her to beg on his behalf somehow, then maybe he could save his life. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet room, Haman was prostrated on the couch upon which Esther was. Now that's astonishing. And in the Hebrew, the verb is present tense, no fail. He's falling on it. Was prostrated is not bad because it's a state of being, right? It's one thing if you're on your knees, facing her, but well, so our tradition says an angel gave him a shove to put him in the worst possible position. And the king said out loud, would he actually assault the queen, meaning to rape her, while I'm in the house? Now, those words already cast Haman in the worst possible light. As soon as the king uttered this, they covered Haman's face, so that the king shouldn't have to look at him because of his wickedness. And now comes payoff time. Harvona, one of the servants in attendance of the king, said, furthermore, now I think they've left out a word here. Yes, they left out a key word. Behold, the 50-cubit high gallows, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, is standing in Haman's house. What does he mean by behold? I told you. You can see it from the window. You can see it from the window. She said make it 50 cubits high, so you'll see Mordecai hanging there and you'll be happy. Yeah, now you can see it from the window. He says, King, look at that. There's the gallows that Haman made for Mordecai. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. He built it in order to kill Mordecai, and he's going to be killed because of it. King said, hide him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows. End of Haman. Which he prepared for Mordecai. King's anger abated. This, as I said it to you, is something which you do find over and over again. That Baruch Hu uses the actions of the wicked against themselves. Okay, now you get a picture both of the king and of Esther. Okay, so the queen's not in danger. Wow, okay, bring out the drinks, bring out the food, the goose. Let's have the meal. Wait a minute, what about her whole people? Yeah.
Question back to the constructing of the gallows and all that. If the Megillah is written by Esther and Mordecai, how did they know about the conversations that Haman had? And they also immediately put him to death.
How do they know about? Well, the truth is, it was written with Ruach HaKodesh. Esther is one of the prophetesses, and this book was written with Ruach HaKodesh. That's why it's part of the canon. So I think that's what you would have to say, unless people, since she's now the queen and they want to curry favor with the queen, so they report the things they heard, and so I suppose you could say that, but we don't have to once it's written with Holy Spirit. So then we don't have to worry. But it's a nice question. It's a good question. Okay, so that very day, King Achashverosh gave the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Mordechai presented himself to the king, for Esther had revealed his relationship to her, whatever that relationship is, either first cousin and the one who took her in and raised her, or husband and wife. The king slipped off his... No, hold on one second. Maybe I was wrong there. No, I don't think they would reveal they were husband and wife. No, just that they were first cousins, they're both Jews, and they're both the same family. The king slipped off his signet ring, which he had removed from Haman. He doesn't wear his ring much. And gave it to Mordechai. Esther put Mordechai in charge of Haman's estate. Now this could all have happened 8 hours later, because what comes in between now is of the first importance, and sometimes the Tanakh does that. You start a story from a certain person's point of view, and you fill this shit from his point of view, and then you go back and fill in what happened in the interim from the point of view of the other agents in the story. That sometimes does happen. I don't think the chronology is recorded here. So, Esther yet spoke again to the king. Now I want you... Okay, we're not going to be able to finish this, but I'll just introduce it and then we'll talk about it tomorrow. Esther yet again spoke to the king, collapsed at his feet, cried, and begged him to avert the evil intention of Haman the Agagite and his scheme to which he had plotted against the Jews. Right? She's collapsed, crying, begging. Right? The king extended his gold scepter to Esther. Esther arose and stood before the king. She said, now listen to this speech. If it pleases the king, and if I have won his favor, and the proposal seems proper in the king's opinion, and I be pleasing to him, let a decree be written to countermand those dispatches devised by Haman, the son of Hamdata the Agagite, which he wrote, ordering the destruction of the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to witness the disaster which will befall my people? How can I bear to witness the destruction of my relatives? Does that sound to you like a person that's confused, desperate, out of breath, fighting to hold back tears? This sounds like a very well-prepared and well-composed speech. It has balance, it has a beginning and an end, it emphasizes 4 times that everything's up to the king's pleasure. Right? It means that falling on the floor and yelling and screaming was histrionics. She put it on. And a king can appreciate when somebody does that. It doesn't have to be that it's just phony and someone would look down on her because of that. You want the king's favor, and you're totally dependent upon him, and he alone will make the decision. Then you want his pity. So you behave in a desperate fashion to try to influence him to be pitiful, to be, and then the 2 sentences are pitiful, to exercise pity in your case, right? It doesn't mean you're really out of control. You're emphasizing how much it means to you. Her speech here is exquisitely constructed, and the vocabulary is carefully chosen. There's no question that the falling on the floor was just histrionics. And she makes a crucial mistake here. She says, let a decree be written to countermand, to override the decree that was written to destroy the Jews. And I mentioned to you a few days ago that the rule in an emperor like this, and I'm sure it wasn't only true in their case, no command coming from the king can be overruled or countermanded. It can't be done. Because if it could be done, then if you live, let's say, 6 weeks' journey from the capital, and you get a message from the king, you don't know whether a week or 2 or 3 weeks from now, the contrary will come. So you don't know, should you follow it or shouldn't you follow it? And you introduce uncertainty into the administration of the kingdom. So in order to avoid that, there was a rule, never will it be countermanded. And Achashverosh picks up on it right away. He says to her, okay, fine, you and Mordechai take care of it. Just, there's a rule, don't write anything to contradict the first command, because that can't be done. Now, I think, I'm not sure of this, but I think that Esther made this seeming mistake on purpose so as to present herself as weak and out of touch a little bit and not really competent to run things, because she doesn't want any competition. She doesn't want to appear to be competing with the king in any way. So she purposely makes herself sound a little out of it. And of course, Mordechai is going to be doing it really, right? Actually, they're going to do it together, as we saw, but from the king's point of view, Mordechai's going to run the show. And here's the woman, okay, she's upset. And she says this, and she makes a mistake. Okay, I hear you. Yeah, your major concern is something which we'll take care of, but it can't be done the way you say, but okay, you didn't know. So he feels superior, he feels unchallenged, which is exactly the way Achashverosh has to feel. There's a lot of subtleties in this text as a literary piece.
She's like a monster manipulator.
Yeah. Okay.